Welcome to the Contemporary Music Centre's Salon series. And in this episode, episode 6, it's a celebration of the guitar. And we feature Benjamin Dwyer with his own works and also a movement from John Buckley's Guitar Sonata. Very warm welcome, Ben. Great to see you, and welcome along to you also, John, joining us again for another Salon. Great to have you along. And we'll start with John's work with this Sonata. Sonata number 1, and we're going to hear the first movement. John, I was reading an interview that Ben did with you a few years back, and of course Ben has also written a book on your works, Constellations. But in this interview with Ben, you said, "I'm a believer in such outdated concepts as inspiration, the search for beauty of expression, and the constant endeavour to refine one's craftsmanship." And I was interested in listening to this movement, very lyrical second movement of this first sonata. Would you say that your work attempts to encompass these aspirations?
Well, I hope so, Yvonne. Craft has always been an essential component of my approach to composition. I believe it to be absolutely essential. Concepts, of course, are essential. The content is essential, and the craft is essential. And it's the combination of these three elements that create the composition. This particular movement is perhaps a little unusual. It's a slow, calm, piangevole is a term that I use at the beginning, meaning that it's meant to be played plaintively. So it's in the nature of a lament, but it's in the middle of a ferociously virtuosic sonata. The first movement and third movement are incredibly vigorous, flamboyant, virtuosic. And this movement is like a sort of an oasis of calm in the midst of that. It's not as virtuosic as the other two, but it's not meant to be any less intense for that reason either. And so, yes, so the search for craft has always been important for me. Beauty, of course, is a term that's almost indefinable in music or the arts in general. They say it's in the eye of, or the ear of the beholder. But I have a search for a particular, I guess when I use that term, I meant for a particular sound, a certain coherence of sound, perhaps, and a certain continuity of sound that's self-contained, so that each piece creates a sort of a small universe, a small world of its own. And for the minutes that lasts, that's the search for beauty through the use of craft.
And can I bring you in there because, we will talk about the intensity and the virtuosity that you bring to this as a performer. But as a composer, craft is also central to you in your practice.
Yeah, well, I started off as a player before I ventured into composition. And, I never had a lesson in composition. No official classes or anything of that nature. My lesson in composition was learning John Buckley's Guitar Sonata and a few other works by Irish composers that I had commissioned. But I think John's first Guitar Sonata stands out as it was written in '89. I think that was a huge contribution to Irish guitar music, that moment. There were pieces before, some good pieces, but the scale and vision of this piece was something that we had not seen in Ireland and in Irish guitar music. And I was young and foolish, but learning John's work, learning this piece was the greatest lesson in composition because of the scale. I mean, the first movement is the big intellectual movement, if you like, and the last movement is, unapologetically virtuosic. But the central movement is the heart and soul of the piece, actually. And as something of an expert on John Buckley's music, having written the book and scanned every piece that he's written, I actually think that this second movement is the most lyrical and intimate and emotional piece that John has written. That's my take on it. It's a very, very beautiful movement. And I don't know if John has stretched his emotional radar as far as he has in this piece, in other pieces, perhaps maybe the violin concerto. So it remains a very important piece, not just in John's oeuvre, but I think it is one of the major pieces. I mean, for sure, one of the major pieces of the Irish guitar repertoire. And it's the first great modernist work. So it's a quite important piece.
Let's hear the heart and soul, as you call it, Ben, of John Buckley's Sonata No. 1, this second movement. Benjamin Dwyer performing from John Buckley's Sonata No. 1, the second movement. And as we talked earlier, Ben and John, you know, very much an intense movement. And as you said, Ben, the heart and soul of that sonata with these sort of bookended virtuosic movements. And, you know, how difficult is it for you as a performer, Ben, to sort of get that across without an audience in the room?
I think there are three different things here. A live performance, that's one thing, where you have this triumvirate between the composer, the interpreter, and the audience. And this is a ritual that has gone back to, you know, ancient Greek theatre. You know, it's 2,500 years old, where we need the three, this magic alchemical reaction between the three. A studio recording is something else. We're going in there, we've worked on our piece, and we are trying to create a single interpretation. People often think, oh, a recording has to be perfect, but I've come to the realization that it's only a moment in someone's life, you know? It's a moment in consciousness, that's all it is. It's like the recording that I've done of John's, I think it was done maybe 5-6 years ago. I play the second movement differently now. That's not to detract from the recording I gave. This is something that's in flux, you know. A Zoom performance live into a computer is something that I probably won't get my head around, actually, because it breaks fundamentally this triumvirate contract between the composer, the performer, and the audience. I struggle with that. I'm curious to know what John feels about this.
Yeah, it's a strange one. I've actually done quite a few myself over the period. Normally, I'm just speaking about the music. I'm not a performing musician, as I'm sure you know, but I often speak and introduce it. And it's very, very strange at the end, where there's a sort of a sense of emptiness almost. As Ben says, the triumvirate of composer, interpreter, and audience is what makes music, really. And the absence of the audience is a very, very strange one indeed. I recently did one for a big international flute convention. And at the end of it, people did come online and wrote things up online, which was actually very nice to get some sort of feedback. But the absence of anything after the performer had played the piece, just silence, was quite bizarre and quite extraordinary. I know in these times it's a wonderful gift to have these Zoom and similar experiences, because otherwise there's absolutely a total void. But nonetheless, of course, it has a somewhat surreal and strange quality about it. And this is just, from my perspective, just introducing my own pieces, not performing them. I'm usually not applauded for introducing them, but the performer is often applauded for performing them. So it does feel quite strange in that regard. And I imagine that when Ben was recording his pieces for this project, that it must have felt, you know, quite empty. As he said, a studio recording is a different thing entirely, where you're editing and recording in segments and so forth. And a studio recording is the best that comes out of the session, not necessarily a straight through performance. In fact, it usually wouldn't be. It would be often edited extensively, but the recording that comes from the studio is the best that comes out of, let's say, that 3 hours spent working on a particular piece.
Mm-hmm. These are all interesting questions that we're all grappling with at the moment, those of us who are involved in music, be it as performers, creators, or mere audience members like ourselves, and trying to create the atmosphere. I think you've really achieved a wonderful atmosphere in the recordings, Ben, and real intensity came across in that movement. If we could talk about your Etude, Ben. I mean, this is quite a big body of work, and you have I suppose they're written over sort of a 10-year period, the etudes, and you've kind of rearranged the order of them and the numbers of them. And we're going to hear a number 6, which you've titled African Print. And there's quite a kind of a specific technique being applied here in your playing.
Yes, I mean there are several techniques actually. It's a piece I'm very happy with actually, compositionally, because when we play the guitar in particular, it requires the collaboration between the left and the right hand. This might seem very obvious. So the left hand holds down the chords of the melody note and the right plucks them, but this piece is based on the separation of the hands. So the left hand works autonomously on a rhythmic pattern or on playing something, and the right hand is then free to make it. So it has, this piece broadens out the timbral palette of the piece. And in that sense, it as an etude, it opens up the possibilities of the instrument, which is something that I've been very interested in doing, even since I've written the 12 etudes, is further deconstructing the instrument. We can talk about that perhaps later on. But this was one of the early pieces where the standard approach to the instrument has been problematized. So it's not based on the collaboration of the left hand and right hand. It's based on the non-collaboration, but that allowed the left hand, for example, to play one rhythmic pattern and the right hand to play completely. So we get this polyrhythmic thing. So it's quite a complex piece. And like I say, I just want to get back to John Buckley's Sonata, because, John wrote that in '89. I started writing my etudes maybe some years after that. But John had set the benchmark, I mean, my 12 etudes represent quite a big piece. It's a 45-minute piece taken together. But, I knew that I had to at least aspire to what John had produced at that stage. And in that sense, it was a tremendous challenge. But had that piece not been written, maybe, I wouldn't have ventured so far myself. So I just want to thank John retrospectively for that wonderful contribution.
Let's hear Benjamin Dwyer's Etude number 6, African Print. It's the last in the second book of Etudes. That was African Print, the Etude number 6 from Benjamin Dwyer's second book of etudes, and Benjamin performing that work. And John, a very big compliment paid to you just before we listened to that etude, and Ben saying that your sonata was really the benchmark.
Well, that's quite something, Ben. Thank you for your kind comment. African Print, of course, is an outstanding work. It explores what to me is virtually entirely new territory for the guitar. I know the 12 etudes rather well. I've heard them on many, many occasions, but African Print is one that stands out because of the independence of the two hands and the layering of sounds and sonorities, and it really creates a print. The title is wonderfully evocative of the music, of course, as well. Ben very kindly mentioned that my piece had set some kind of standard. I'm not a guitarist, and for a non-guitarist writing for the guitar, it's one of the most demanding instruments imaginable. Everything in the guitar is sort of hidden. You know, on a piano, you see all the keys. On a flute, any note you write can be followed by virtually any other note. On the guitar, it's quite different. It's obscure, it's hidden, it's kind of arcane. It's like a mystery where the notes actually come. Some chords that you think would be absolutely simple and straightforward on the piano, you can't do them on the guitar. And on the other hand, you can do certain things on the guitar quite easily that you couldn't do on a piano or another instrument. So coming to terms with the guitar was a major part of my own writing. I treated it as I would any other instrument. In the mid to late 80s, I had written a number of large-scale virtuosic works, violin sonata, for example, winter music for piano, I Am Wind on Sea for voice. And so I treated the guitar, perhaps innocently, as if it were a piano or a voice or an unaccompanied violin. I treated it the same way and created the same type of music for it on the same scale. So I wasn't thinking, oh my goodness, I'm writing for guitar, I better scale things down and do differently. I wanted the piece for guitar to be as big for guitar as the other pieces were for their instruments. And
it seems that you achieved that, John. I mean, from what Ben is saying, you absolutely achieved that. And, you know, you're talking there about what the guitar can and can't do and comparisons with other instruments brings me, I suppose, nicely, Ben, to talk about, you know, the fact that you are a performer, composer. Both are very much Ben Dwyer as we know you. And, you know, hearing Ben talk or hearing John talk about, you know, what the guitar can and can't do, I mean, is that limiting? Is it liberating? I mean, you know, can it be both at times?
I think you have to be very careful. Quite often, the danger with being a composer, performer is that it's difficult not to fall into cliche or what your hands know. Now, Stravinsky said, you know, we should trust our hands. You know, Petrushka was written for 2 pianos. And he said, you know, we should trust our hands sometimes. So there's a certain, you know, gift there. But you can be, if you're not vigilant, you can fall into these old traps. And there are a lot of cliches in guitar because of the structure of the instrument that guitarists fall into. And I've always tried to go against that. So while you are virtuosic in your instrument, you're trying to sort of go against it all the time, you know. And I some of the etudes go with the instrument, like the first one, you know, the third one, Etude 3. But many actually are trying to go against what would be considered inevitable. And I think that's what I hoped to have achieved, you know. I mean, the strange thing is now, the next pieces that we're going to hear now, the Beckett pieces, are very difficult pieces, but they don't sound very difficult in compared to the etudes. And so this has been a very interesting journey for me, that instead of following my hands, I was following an aesthetic. So it was nothing. These Beckett pieces, and I wrote 3 Beckett pieces in this year, last year, 2019. So it becomes a big Beckett project, which was released on Diatribe Records. You know, it was, if you like, it was an intellectual pursuit, trying to figure out what Beckett was doing in the last 15, 20 years of his writing, and seeing how I might be able to find a shared ground with that. And because of Beckett's sparseness and his sense of impoverishment, especially in his latter years, it sort of takes you in the opposite direction to, or from, the virtuoso, you know? I mean, Beckett speaks about, you know, why is all this, what's all this excess, you know? And etudes are by nature excessive, you know? And if you're following Beckett, you know, you're going in the opposite direction, which was very unusual for me, but very healthy, you know? And I'm fascinated by what John said earlier about the guitar having secrets. It's absolutely true. I mean, maybe I've always known this, but to hear it afresh is interesting. Because in the last, especially as well with my improvisations, I'm doing a lot of free improvisation in the last 5 years. I'm actually now, you know, you could see maybe where etudes are trying to embrace the entire world of the guitar. But for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been trying to deconstruct the instrument. And so with the use of prepared guitar, I'm dividing the fretboard up into 3 different sound regions. Or I'm playing the guitar with a bow, which would be unheard of course, you know. Segovia would be turning in his grave if he heard me. But it's trying to unlock the latent sounds within the instrument, and Beckett has helped me do that.
Let's hear that unlocking, Ben, with 2 of the Disjecta after Beckett. We're going to begin with number 5 and then go back to the first of the Disjecta. Benjamin Dwyer on the guitar. Disjecta number 5 and number 1 from Benjamin Dwyer, and that wonderful performance, Ben, from you of both of those works, Disjecta after Beckett, and great to touch a little on how much Beckett has been part of your artistic thoughts, I suppose we could say, over the last few years. But if we just skip back to 2018 and we leave Beckett for a moment, you were involved in a big Debussy project, a project that Therese Fahy, the pianist, was I suppose we could say was Therese's brainchild, where she, for the Debussy anniversary, commissioned 7 Irish composers to respond to the tombeau to Debussy, which had been composed a few years after Debussy's death. And you took as your starting point one of Debussy's Etude, but you also, I think, were informed by the fact that Manuel de Falla had written for the original tombeau, and the work was for guitar and performed by you also here in Dublin and in Paris at the Centre Culturel Irlandais. Will you just tell us a little bit about that work, Ben?
Well, the Falla piece is recognised as perhaps the first great modern piece in the repertoire. Even though it's only 4 minutes long, it's the first piece written by a non-guitarist composer, and it's a masterpiece in miniature. I'm sure John knows this piece very well. And you know, when Britten heard this piece, he said this is a 20-minute piece condensed to 4 minutes, and it's a fabulous piece by Manuel de Falla. So yes, so this was a wonderful opportunity. Therese Fahy asked me to participate, but not to write a piano piece, but to write a guitar piece. And she knew about this Falla piece, so the plan was for me to play the Falla and to play my own piece. And there's 99 years between both of these pieces, my own and Falla's, and I gave them almost the same title. So Falla's piece is called Homenaje, Tombeau sur la mort de Claude Debussy, and mine is just Tombeau sur la mort de Claude Debussy. And yes, I leaned on Debussy's third Etude pour les quarts, for the fourths, because the guitar is mainly constructed and tuned in fourths. And it's quite an extraordinary, I mean, the Debussy Etudes were already central to my thinking anyway, because I was listening to them a lot and analysing them while I was writing my own Etudes, of course. But actually, there's something very mysterious about the third Etude. The ending is the most beautiful, elusive ending in all piano music, in my view. But more significantly is, and it's a huge challenge, is when you are engaging with another composer. What do you do, especially a composer of the prestige of Debussy? You know, it's almost it's unfathomable, really. What do you do? So it was a daunting challenge, but I did use some elements of Debussy which I wanted hanging in the air like ghosts, and I kind of let them seep into my own. The problem is you try to engage with Debussy without losing your own voice, your own compositional signature. At the same time, you want to do justice to Debussy. It's it's a very difficult thing. So I mean, Britain did this a lot with John Dowland, and there is a history of this, you know, with Dowland and the other English composer whose name I can't remember. Stravinsky did it with Pergolesi, you know, Bach did it with Vivaldi. You know, there's a lot of, and it's one of the greatest compliments you can give to a composer is to do your best to write something which where you bring the essence of that composer into your own language. Henry Purcell was the second English composer that I was trying to remember. And so, you know, I was engaging with the third Etude, but also trying to figure out a way, what would Debussy have written had he had the opportunity or the inkling to write for the instrument. And there, it was a great lesson for me, because trying to look at the guitar again through Debussy's ears opened up a whole new French palette that I didn't realize was lying dormant. So I strongly recommend it for composers to engage with other composers, because these great composers, Ligeti does it as well with Guillaume de Mochon. I mean, I think it's a great thing to do, to lose yourself in another composer. See what you learn from the experience.
Also kind of brings back the craft question that we were speaking of earlier on as well.
Absolutely.
But I think you really did achieve something very special here, Ben. And let's hear the Tombeau sur le Monde de Debussy, performed and written by Benjamin Dwyer. Tombeau sur le Morgue de Debussy, performed and written by Benjamin Dwyer in this week's CMC Salon, and that work, as we heard, from 2019 from the Tombeau de Debussy project, and performed both here in Dublin and in Paris, and hopefully we'll hear in performance again. Ben, you're usually regularly performing at concerts at home and abroad, and I suppose as well, I was thinking earlier, you know, when we were looking at the Beckett pieces and that recording on Diatribe, big collaborative partners for you are Barry Guy and Maya Homburger, and that's been a musical friendship and collaboration over many years.
Yeah. I mean, I suddenly got a phone call about 5 years. I've known Maya and Barry for 20 years. I brought Barry Guy New Orchestra over about 15 years ago to the Music Now festival, and I had even known them before that. But my sort of more artistic engagement started maybe 7 years ago, and I suddenly got a phone call to join the Barry Guy's new group, the Blue Shroud Band, which is an extraordinary group of amazing musicians, and it's a great privilege to be part of that ensemble and to play Barry Guy's masterpiece. I think it's a masterpiece called the Blue Shroud, and we've performed that all over Europe in the big halls all over Europe. The last time was in the South Bank Centre in the Purcell Room, and this piece requires me to be the lutenist to one of the great early music performers, Maya Homburger, playing Bieber. I have to play some flamenco music because the piece is based on Picasso's Guernica. I have to play complex contemporary music, but I've also to free improvise, and it has just exploded. My playing and my compositional mind, quite frankly. And kind of a Pandora's box has been opened, and I'm a little bit scared that I won't get the materials back in again. But, you know, this is a journey. It's a journey. And of course, the commitment that Maya and Barry bring to their performances, to their preparation, to their performances, is a lesson in itself. And they've performed my music, I've performed their music, and it's been a really beautiful collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, they're so amazing to watch. I mean, your recent performance at New Music Dublin, where you performed alongside them, and they also performed together in other works, really was, I think, one of the highlights for me of the festival. And it's funny you should say about bringing Barry to that festival 15 years ago. My first experience of hearing Barry Guy live was your Mostly Modern series in the Bank of Ireland many years ago. And as you say, it was like a Pandora's box of music opening up within that hour of, there was no break. I think it was just complete improvisation for an hour of Barry and his fellow musicians. It's a moment that stands out for me in my musical memory.
Yeah, I think the lesson there is, and John will understand this, is commitment. The absolute commitment. Whether you're composing or playing, it doesn't really matter. The commitment to doing and this gets us back to the craft thing, but you take the craft and you jump off the cliff with the craft, and you have to jump off the cliff. So this brings in the element of risk in performance, and in order to survive, you have to play your best. And that has been a really interesting lesson for me to learn, that, if we need to be brave in writing pieces, and we need to be brave in performing them.
For your final choice for this salon, Ben, I suppose it's been lovely to hear works from different periods of your career, and you've chosen an older work from about 25 years ago, Song for Her, and we're going to close the salon with this work. Will you tell us a little bit about it, Ben?
Well, yeah, this is a sweet little piece. I wrote this a day or two after my mother died, and it's a small, sweet, little jazz-inflected piece, but somehow, because of the circumstances of its composition. It has remained really an important piece for me, you know. It's not part of my normal musical language, but heck, doesn't matter. That's what I mean. John has done one here like that with 3 lullabies for Deirdre, you know. It's nice to show that you can write a melody sometimes, but this has remained a kind of a private favorite piece of mine for obvious reasons.
Well, thanks for sharing it with us, Ben. Let's hear it. Song for Her, composed and performed by Benjamin Dwyer. Song for Her, composed and performed by Benjamin Dwyer, who featured in our salon this evening, and joined by John Buckley, whose work we heard at the beginning of the salon. It's been a real pleasure to have you both along and to share your thoughts on your works, on performing, on music and collaboration and craft. It's been fascinating for me to be able to speak with you both this evening, and thanks so much for joining us. Next week, well, it's very much for the viola fans, when Sebastian Adams will perform his own works on viola and works by Tom Lane and Amanda Feary. And full details of that salon, that's episode number 7, are on our website cmc.ie and across our social media channels. Thanks for joining us.